Good afternoon. We are two of three members of a design studio named Wonder. This is Sam, I'm Christian. We're both ex-high school English teachers and soccer coaches and folks who have no training whatsoever in formal design. We are, however, partnered with an architect who's been designing schools and universities for nearly 30 years, and so we're very, very lucky to be guilty by association. We are going to talk a little bit about a story that we've been very, very fortunate to be invited into. It's not a project that we launched, and what I love about one of our final points is that every one of these projects started somewhere, in somebody, or in a relationship, or in a dinner conversation. We were lucky to be many people behind that, but to be smart enough to say yes. If you'd switch to the next slide. So we're going to talk about a project in Memphis, Tennessee. Sam's out of Washington, D.C. I'm out of a small college town outside of Columbus, Ohio. And we have the good fortune of working with communities around the country and sometimes out of the country who are at what we call their kind of moonshot moment. And that can sort of borrow from Google, like this is the moment they're like, we're going that way. Or it's just something more modest. They just believe now's the time to admit what they've been doing all along. They've always been doing it. It's just time to share that story. Our firm Wonder, from the sort of, when you enter the website, we always wanted to err on the side of the human beings that we work with, not necessarily the architectural projects or the curriculum projects or the branding projects or the whatever the object is. We really wanted to say that while we're very, very fortunate and we geek about the things we get to do, in this case designing schools, what we really care about is that collision between people and the things they are in love with or wrestle with. Right? Next, please. So in this case, we refer to our projects as expeditions, and we do that very intentionally with the idea that a project, like any of the elements that folks have already shared in this particular festival, we do have a sense of what's possible. We do have a sense of how to fund, or at least to imagine what they might cost. We do have a sense of who might be involved, what the implications are, the political barriers, what it might even look like, or what it should feel like. But if we're really serious and we're really sincere, the real truth is we have no idea. Not just us, none of us. We want to put something into motion. And if we do our job right, it's the thing that happens next is where the real fun is. So in essence, for us, expeditions are, we're going that way together because your design question matters deeply.
Hi, everybody.
Helicopter 920.
Not yet. Sorry. First of all, I just want to say thank you for inviting us here. Some of the most fun conferences that I get to attend are the ones that swirl together lots of us that are in different professions and all approaching kind of similar spirit to the work from very different angles. And just based on the place attachment reactions, I'm going to guess that a lot of you are like me and that you actually are lucky enough to really love what you do. And part of the reason from my perspective is, as Christian said, because when we get invited in to work with a community, it is the moment at which somebody or some group of people have decided that they're going to kind of double down on something that really puts everybody into the right zone of risk and not danger. That being said, some animals are more equal than others. And so this project, from the very beginning, when we first were researching, we knew we were about to have a call with some folks and they were in Memphis, and then we learned that there was this development team that was headed by an art history professor. And this development team was trying to reimagine a 1.5 million square foot space, an abandoned Sears warehouse that had been abandoned for 2 decades, and had this vision of transforming it into what they called a vertical urban village. So 250 mixed income apartments, incubation and office space for businesses specializing in arts, education, and healthcare, restaurant and retail. And so we were instantly curious, but it was clear before we even had the call that this was a group that had really spent some time thinking about what it is that they wanted to do and why. And so as we were doing the research, we found this video.
Helicopter 920, request water. Ready work at the old Sears Crosstown building at 800 Traveler safety. We're operating on a film waiver. Information allows restrictions required.
The Crosstown development project started with a conversation that probably hundreds, even thousands of Memphians have had over the last 20 years. And that is, how amazing would it be if something cool could happen with the historic Sears building? And it's hugely important that even the very first idea for this project was a shared experience, a collective thought. Not just one person, one developer, or one preconceived vision.
And here we are, together, as a city, nearly 5 years later, starting construction on the renovation. Looking back at the process and how it unfolded, it's the same collective spirit, the coming together of a lot of people who believed in the idea, as far-fetched as it may have seemed.
The development team knew this early on, that it had to be a group effort, not just about renovating a building, but also about building community. The project and vision came to be defined by this sense of community effort, the multitude of people involved, rather than simply the gigantic space to be filled. We knew from the beginning that we wanted the creative community to play a significant role in the development, and also have a presence in the building. While the arts was a catalyst and means of community building, the specifics of the project took shape over time based on conversations with leaders of local organizations. It was out of this kind of collaborative process that the vertical urban village concept was born.
I think what excited everyone about the vertical urban village vision was the potential for organizations not just to co-locate or coexist like a typical mixed-use project. What inspired our founding tenets was the possibility of interweaving programming and resources, even sharing space.
Because let's be honest, even among the believers, there were still a few who thought the idea was a little crazy.
I mean, right? Doesn't that seem so cool? But of course, we wouldn't get invited unless they were willing to think even bigger about that. I mean, you get a sense of the spirit that's at the center of this, of trying to bring together lots of people, of trying to have that be a true way station that's really shared. But it wasn't just restaurants and coffee houses and art spaces. They were also going to house a brand new public high school. And what we said on that call, very honestly, because we believe it to be true, was to some degree the success of the high school will ultimately determine the success or the failure of the entire concept. Because if the school is not the most vibrant, exciting, living embodiment of the spirit of what you just saw, then it will tarnish everything else. And so we weren't trying to scare them, but I think we did, and so they were like, well, I guess we better hire these guys. But as Christian said, it's not like we know clearly and easily how to do that. But the thing that's really interesting is if you think about education at this inflection point in education right now, we're in search of a new set of design principles. And so, in a way, the perfect metaphor for where we have been and what we need to be shifting away from is this building itself, right? So, I mean, not surprisingly, the Sears Warehouse has been abandoned for 20 years, but Sears had a good run, right? It was Amazon before Amazon. So when they first started changing this building, there were giant wooden slides that people would literally like put TVs on the top of the wooden slides and slide them down to the trucks. This is a real monument to the industrial era. And here's the thing, right? If we think about education, the reality is there are very few aspects of American public life that are as guaranteed in a room filled with people from different places, different ages, different backgrounds. The one thing I can say pretty confidently is that the one experience of all of our lives that has been most consistently felt has been our education. And that makes sense. If we think about it, this slide right here captures for me the two fundamental design principles of the experience that has shaped almost everybody's experience in this room and is continuing to shape far too many. And it's the idea of the tabula rasa and the assembly line. This image, anybody recognize where this is from? Waiting for Superman, which came out a while ago now, but was kind of like the seminal education film of the last 10 years. And what was crazy is when they used this image was actually offered uncritically. The image was not to say, isn't this crazy that we're still doing this? It was showing the inefficiencies in the system, and to be clear, there are many, that were affecting the teacher's aim. Could you go back? And so what the image is meant to show is that the teacher is having trouble pouring the knowledge into the passive vessel. And therefore, what the film was calling for was our ability to essentially smooth out the conveyor belt. I'm sorry, no. But we see evidence of this all over. Now the next slide, thank you, which is, first of all, I love the impossibility of this image. It's impossible on many levels. On one level, like, how did he write all the way up there? Like, how does he get up there? But also just that the assumption is that he understands all of that, and these people understand none of it, right? And so higher ed is basically like, you have to file into the lecture hall as the passive vessel, receive the information, and then hopefully do something with it. But that's because if the industrial era was fundamentally set up on an idea of like having TVs going down wooden slides and being packed onto trucks, education, the TV was content knowledge. That was the end goal. It was merely what you're able to pour into a kid. But here's the thing. So you still see kids across the country that have the experience of being in a lecture hall, but they all have laptops. So it's almost like this isn't just a design flaw at this stage. This is antediluvian. Like, this is literally, we are so far behind where we need to be, but there's a gift in that, which is the opportunity we now have before us in the way that technology has changed our relationship to content knowledge, is we are in a position where content knowledge can stop being seen implicitly and explicitly as the end goal. Content is merely the means by which we reach the end goal. It's not about knowledge, it's about being.
So as we step back into the building, literally pre-renovation, on some level, if engineering, construction, architecture, branding, rooms like this, teams like this know how to pull this off. This isn't the great design challenge of our age. Next slide. As we begin to open it up, we realize that moving millions of square feet of abandoned concrete does take some strategy, that hiring hundreds and thousands of workers so that the project doesn't end their viability, it's the beginning of their next, is strategically complicated, but ultimately not the great design challenge of our era, let alone what the future will expect of us. Next slide. So as we sat down with young people and parents and community leaders and spiritual leaders, hospital administrators and presidents, university presidents, artists, folks who were just curious, what's going on in that building? Why are you guys not from Memphis if you get to play a role? I mean, to be honest, why you if not us? What do you mean by this new school? Will it just be the school we've all known? What do you mean you're actually looking at the future of education differently? What does it mean to go to school, but to not assume it's just to go to school? So we sat with young people. The first thing you ask them isn't, what would you like in a school? It's the worst design question. It's tempting when we ask our kids, what'd you do at school today? It's not a very eloquent question. What would you like in your school? What you're really looking for is, what do they stand for? What do they give a shit about? What do they itch to do? What are they confused by? But just as importantly, how do they lean into the question literally together? Not what chair should they sit in, how do they operate together? Next slide, please. While we do want them to ponder space and place, materials, sustainability, a space that looks like Google or Starbucks in an urban public school in Memphis, pretty shocking to a lot of kids and families, educators, leaders. But ultimately, it's about their body language. How do they wrestle with complex problems, not just solve our problem? One of the worst things we can do in a community, whether they're kiddos or everyone, is to say, help us solve our problem. We need you for 2 hours in this workshop, and we promise to give it to you when it's done. We know better, just like Ford did, or Steve Jobs. What we really need is to realize we don't have any idea. We need to watch them. Next slide. So we'll do this really, really quickly, long before we provide a solution. Architectural plans, renderings, curriculum, a school website, whatever the object is. We've got to figure out what are the non-negotiables. What are the things that must be true in everything, regardless of material or tactical decision. So in essence, it's like the golden rule. If we can figure out what our golden rules are in a school, in an abandoned Sears and Roebuck's warehouse, or an entire city like Roanoke, or an entire country, if we figure out the non-negotiables, we can design anything as long as we commit to those lenses. So for us, our design drivers are not about the objects, they're about the values and the verbs. Next slide, please. So as we go through, and we're fast tracking, this is months of dialoguing, workshops, dinners, just walking, just observing, just being anthropologists, not engineers. Taking note of rituals, not trying to solve their problem. The first that we came to the conclusion of is that for them a non-negotiable was this school as an architectural physical space, but in everything must be open and welcome. It must beg you to lean in. But so should the process of being hired to be a teacher. So should be the experience of a parent stepping onto campus. So should the idea of a young person going, tell me more about that idea, to a peer. It doesn't just stop in the architectural decision. It means it's universal. It's ubiquitous. It's a non-negotiable. Second, please. When we're inside a building that 1.5 million square feet and we have all these incredible things, universities, arts groups, restaurants, leaders of Memphis's past and future, the worst solution could be, and the tempting one, is just put the kids comfortably in a corner and hope they do no harm. Especially if it's urban meets public. And I don't mean urban meaning one part of the community. I mean kids coming from all over Memphis, all different backgrounds, all different schools, all different socioeconomic backgrounds, etc. But to be honest, adults are scared of young people. We become uncomfortable if we don't manage every part of our engagement with them. So you put kiddos on the verge of their next to all those businesses, non-for-profits. If you don't design for those collisions, it's just a building with a nice wall around it. Inside a sexy coffee shop meets entrepreneurial collaborative platform. And it doesn't mean anything to anybody on either side of the wall. Next. This one for us became really interesting. We wanted the physical experience to be a series of unexpected and plausible intersections, connections, collisions. We wanted to walk around spaces, not down hallways with double-loaded corridors, classroom, 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 but instead that serendipity and unexpectedness would be much a part of the DNA as purpose and intention.
Next, please. We also heard, and it wasn't just from young people, how important the next generation of schools, how important it is that the next generation of schools has to be designed in a very different way when we think about young people. And I guess the best way I can think about it is, I think about my own public high school experience. It would have never occurred to me that the job of the school was to adjust to me. My job was to adjust to me. What will it look like if in the future schools are intentionally set up to try to organize themselves around student interests and motivations? Next slide. This notion of, there in some places, and I should say, because we're not really spending a lot of time talking about education, you hear how everything is horrible and the sky is falling. Here's the thing, people, right? Very few schools are horrible, just like very few schools are truly great. Most schools are pretty good, and they're somewhere on the pretty good continuum. They're either pretty good, almost great, or pretty good, almost not so good. But in the places that are on the right side of the continuum, one thing that folks are starting to realize more and more is the idea that school is not a place. So to the extent that you're treating kids like military soldiers, bad idea. So the notion of city as school is really gaining currency in a lot of places. But what's so interesting about what they have in Memphis is it's the notion of city within a city as school. So whatever we design has to be a place that doesn't just make that permeable, that's constantly having kids out in that world. Not something that's a field trip, but that's like just a part of breathing if you're going to Crosstown High. Last one. So, we talked about how we're in need of this new metaphor and this new image that's as powerful as the design principles of the industrial era. And of course, if you had to sum up the function of that in one word, it would be efficiency. So we just made up a word here. Okay, so you won't find expeditioncy anywhere. It's not really catchy, but it kind of gets at the idea, which is if we're going to get this right, we're not just becoming less efficient, we're becoming more expedient. We're being more intentional in the ways in which you don't even view school as a place where most of the learning takes place. It's base camp. It's where you're literally filling up your rucksack and heading out on new expeditions. Like, what does that look like, and how do you begin to make that possible?
So if we take that seriously, we take that list of 6 design drivers, call them themes, call them attitudes, call them dispositions, call it a mindset. 1, does it play nicely with Crosstown Concourse? Yeah, these have to at least rhyme, but they have to be unique and purposeful to the young people and their mentors. We have to think architecturally. This can't look like a great school of yesteryear with a neat room down the end of the hall that does maker spacing stuff. Right? If this is true culture, you don't go to the maker lab, you live as a maker. You don't collaborate on Collaboration Tuesdays or 20% Fridays. Your default setting is, I got a good idea, you got a better idea, let's make this happen. So we needed space to live up to that. Next slide, please. And to a degree, we wanted to make sure, something's missing, but okay, well, that's fine. One of the things we also realized very quickly is that even if we get the space right, even if we get the language right, branding, provocation, this is what we agreed to, right? The invitation to go out, use school as base camp, to let people flow in and out of each other's assignments, but also lives. It also means we can't just hire the way we've been hiring.
Which means we're looking for a few good people. Do you guys know anybody? I know they're out there. And one of the things that we've really understood is that this project is the job of a lifetime for the right person, for the person that understands instinctively that the purpose of education is not to put information into kids, it's to pull their unique essence out. And because we're still figuring this out as we go, we are constantly in search of things that help us better name what it is that we're talking about. And so if you'll forgive us, Christian and I are obsessed with this video that we just saw, which we think actually captures perfectly the spirit of what the schools of the future need to be about. And
No, skip through this. Skip through this.
skip
This is
that.
not the video of the future,
Yeah.
although it is
But
the rendering of
that's
the
it.
building. Next one. This is Forest School in Nova Scotia, Canada. 100% of every minute of every child's school existence takes place outside, whether it's rainy, foggy, or sunny. There are several others around the world, but this is the one that won us over. One of the things as a design team or design partners to teams trying to do that moonshot moment or just fall in love with what is just kind of fun or badass is that we know how to design playgrounds, but the goal of this isn't to design a replica puddle. We know how to design curriculum and field trips. Notice the educators can't be seen or heard, but they are absolutely paying attention and taking note. And most importantly, we've got to be aware that if we're going to design the next in a way that's deeply meaningful, getting the solution right may not be the design challenge. Creating the conditions so that each one of them figures out their trajectory, and while the building or project or platform might be in the background and the reason they came together, at the end of the day, whether they're drawn to the puddle or they've got a sense of where next, or frankly, they get lost, this may be the great design question for us, whether it be parents, urban planners, or folks who have no idea what lies a decade or a century ahead. Thank you for your time.